Around 2,500 years ago, in the mountains of Central Asia, a Greek historian wrote something strange. He described a nomadic tribe throwing seeds onto red-hot stones inside a small tent, and when the smoke rose, the people inside began shouting with joy. For over 2,000 years, most historians assumed he was exaggerating. Then archaeologists found the proof buried underground. Figuring out exactly when humans started smoking cannabis for its high, rather than just growing it as a crop, is an incredibly hard question. THC breaks down fast. It doesn't fossilize, and it doesn't survive the way bones or tools do. So for a long time, this remained one of history's most frustrating mysteries. Here's the twist. Humans have been growing cannabis for over 10,000 years, long before this story even begins. But that early cannabis was grown almost entirely for fiber and oil, to make rope, cloth, and food. Those ancient plants had barely any THC in them at all, so there was nothing to get high from. That changed with a discovery at the Jirzankal Cemetery, a burial site perched nearly 10,000 feet up in the Pamir Mountains of western China. Inside 8 ancient tombs, archaeologists found 10 wooden bowls, called braziers, each containing small stones that had clearly been exposed to intense heat. When researchers chemically analyzed the burnt residue on those stones, they found something unmistakable: cannabinol, a compound that forms specifically when THC breaks down under heat. This wasn't hemp being burned for fiber. This was cannabis, deliberately heated to release its intoxicating smoke. What made this even more surprising was the potency. The cannabis burned at Jirzankal had noticeably higher THC levels than typical wild plants from that era. Researchers believe people at this high altitude may have specifically sought out or cultivated more potent strains, or that the extreme mountain environment naturally produced them. And this is where the story circles back. That ancient Greek historian, Herodotus, had written almost this exact scene centuries earlier, describing a nomadic group called the Scythians doing precisely this at funerals. For 2,000 years, people doubted him. The Jirzankal discovery proved he'd been telling the truth all along. This wasn't casual, recreational smoking either. Both Herodotus' account and the archaeological evidence point to the same context: mourning. This cannabis smoke was part of funeral rituals, likely meant to help the living cope with grief or to honor and communicate with the dead. There are hints of even older cannabis use too. In a separate discovery, nearly 2 pounds of cannabis were found buried in a 2,700-year-old tomb belonging to a man researchers believe was a shaman. Its exact use is still unclear, but it suggests cannabis may have held spiritual significance even earlier than Jirzankal. So how did humans even figure out cannabis could do this? Many researchers believe it happened by accident. People likely burned cannabis alongside other plants for incense, insect repellent, or ritual smoke, and eventually noticed the different, more powerful effect it produced. Once discovered, this knowledge didn't stay in one place. Cannabis use in ritual and religious contexts appears across ancient China, India, and the wider steppes of Central Asia. In ancient India, some scholars connect cannabis to a sacred ritual drink described in ancient hymns, used to reach altered spiritual states. Across nearly every ancient culture we have evidence for, cannabis wasn't treated as something casual. It was tied to religion, mourning, and altered states of consciousness believed to connect people to the spiritual world, a pattern strikingly different from how it's often viewed today. Despite all this evidence, researchers are careful to say Jirzankal isn't necessarily the very first time humans smoked cannabis, only the earliest we can currently prove with hard science. Given how fragile chemical evidence is, the real origin could easily be older, just still waiting underground somewhere. What this really tells us is that humans have been experimenting with altering their own minds for thousands of years longer than most people realize. Long before written history, before organized religion as we know it, people were already searching for ways to connect with something bigger than themselves. So to sum it up, cannabis was cultivated for over 10,000 years mostly for fiber. The earliest confirmed evidence of smoking it to get high comes from a 2,500-year-old cemetery in the Pamir Mountains, and it finally proved a 2,000-year-old Greek historian right all along. So the next time you hear an old story that sounds too strange to be true, remember Herodotus. He wrote about smoke, seeds, and red-hot stones over 2,000 years before anyone could prove it. Sometimes the truth really is buried, quite literally, waiting for the right person to dig deep enough to find it.